I was standing at my kitchen counter in Columbus, coffee going cold beside me, when I saw the photo. It came up on my phone from an account I didn't recognize, some wedding photographer named Jessica Marlowe. The caption read, "So honored to capture Ryan and Emily's big day. 6 years of friendship led to this moment. Ring sparkles. #HartwellBarnWeddings." My hands went cold before my brain caught up. Ryan, my son, in a gray suit I'd never seen, laughing at something off camera, his arm around a woman in white lace. Behind them, string lights. A barn door. A crowd of people I didn't recognize, raising glasses. I checked the timestamp. 2 hours ago.
Today.
It was happening today. Nobody had called me. Not Ryan. Not anyone. I want to tell you I stayed calm, that I set the phone down and breathed. I didn't. I called his number 4 times in a row, my thumbs shaking so hard I kept missing the green button. Straight to voicemail every time. The same flat, unfamiliar recording. Not even his voice anymore. If you've ever loved someone who stopped answering, you already know that specific kind of quiet. It doesn't feel like silence.
It feels like falling.
Stick with me, because what I found out over the next few weeks wasn't the story I thought I was living in. And if you've ever been the one left out of a room you helped build, hit subscribe, because by the end of this, you'll understand why I almost didn't go looking for the truth at all. My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 58 years old, and I've lived in Columbus, Ohio my whole life. The last 22 years in a small brick house on Larchmere Avenue that my late husband Michael and I bought when Ryan was 3. Michael died when Ryan was 12. Car accident on Route 33, a rainy Tuesday in October, the kind of ordinary day that splits your life into before and after. I raised Ryan alone for the next 7 years, packed lunches, coached him through algebra I didn't understand myself, sat in the bleachers at every baseball game, in every kind of weather. It was just the two of us against everything, and for a long time, that felt like enough. When Ryan was 19, I remarried. Frank Doyle, a quiet, decent man, a retired electrician, someone who never tried to replace Michael and never pretended he could. But Ryan didn't see it that way. He was 19 and grieving a father he'd lost 7 years earlier, and Frank moving into our house felt, to him, like a door closing on his dad for good. Ryan moved out at 22. We stayed close-ish, birthday calls, the occasional Sunday dinner, but something had shifted and it never fully shifted back. I told myself it was normal distance, the kind every mother and grown son go through. I didn't know yet how much distance had actually opened up between us, or who had been quietly widening it. Ryan met Emily Sanders about 3 years ago at a work conference in Cincinnati. He called me that same week, which now feels like a long time ago, practically giddy. "Mom, I met someone." I hadn't heard that particular lightness in his voice since before Michael died. I met Emily for the first time at a cookout that summer. She was warm, funny, quick to laugh at her own jokes. I liked her immediately. Her mother, Carol Sanders, came along too, a tall, sharp-eyed woman who complimented my potato salad and then spent the rest of the afternoon subtly steering every conversation back to Emily's father, a man who'd passed away when Emily was in college. "Emily's had to be so strong," Carol said to me that day, watching her daughter across the yard. "It's just been the two of us for so long." I understood that kind of bond. I told her so. I didn't think much of it then. Why would I? It was one afternoon, one comment. I had no way of knowing that Carol had spent years building a particular kind of closeness with Emily, the kind that doesn't leave much room for anyone else to stand too close. Frank noticed something before I did. On the drive home, he said, "That mother's got her hooks in pretty deep." I laughed it off. I told him every mother is close with her daughter. I wish I'd listened to him a little harder. The engagement came 14 months before the wedding. Ryan called to tell me himself, and for a moment it felt like nothing had ever gone sideways between us at all. "We want you there for everything, Mom," he said. "Dress shopping, cake tasting, all of it." For a few months, it was true. I went to one cake tasting. I sat in on a video call about seating charts. Small things, but they mattered to me more than I let on. Then, slowly, the invitations thinned out. A venue walkthrough I wasn't told about until after happened. A menu decided without me. Each time, There was a reasonable-sounding explanation, scheduling conflicts, Carol already handling it, Emily wanting a smaller planning circle. I want to be fair here. None of it, on its own, was a slap in the face. It was more like water finding the lowest point in a floor you didn't know was uneven. A dozen small omissions, each easy to excuse, slowly building into something with weight. My sister-in-law Linda, Michael's sister, my closest friend since before Ryan was born, noticed the pattern before I said a word about it. You've mentioned 3 planning things you found out about after the fact, she told me over coffee. That's not an accident, Diane. That's a pattern. I told her I was probably just being sensitive.
Linda didn't believe me.
Neither, if I'm honest, did I. 4 months before the wedding, I had lunch with Ryan, just the 2 of us, at a diner we used to go to when he was in high school, back when Michael was still alive and Sunday breakfasts there were sacred. He seemed distracted, checking his phone, answering in short sentences. How's the planning going? I asked, trying to sound easy about it.
Fine. Busy.
Carol's been a huge help. She basically knows every vendor in the state. A pause. Emily's really leaning on her mom for a lot of this. Makes sense, since her dad's gone. Of course, I said. I'm happy to help with anything, too. He nodded, but something in his face had already moved on to the next thing. I remember thinking, even then, that he looked tired in a way that wasn't just about wedding stress. Like he was carrying something he hadn't set down in front of me. Near the end of lunch, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Things have been a little tense between me and Emily's side, honestly. Nothing major. I'll fill you in eventually." I asked what he meant. He waved it off. "It's fine, Mom, don't worry about it," and changed the subject to his job. I let it go. That's the thing about being a mother of a grown child. You learn, sometimes wrongly, when to push and when to wait to be told. I waited. It cost me more than I understood at the time. Around that same time, I met Carol's side of the family properly for the first time at an engagement dinner Carol hosted at her house, a beautiful colonial in Upper Arlington, the kind with a chandelier in the entryway and family photos lining the staircase, none of which included me, Michael, or anything from Ryan's childhood. Carol was gracious to my face, warm, even, but I noticed she introduced Emily's late father in almost every toast. Emily's dad would be so proud, while Michael's name never came up once, even though Ryan is just as much his son as he is mine. I mentioned it to Frank on the drive home. He shrugged, the way he does when he's trying not to stir something up. "Maybe it just didn't come up naturally," he said. "Maybe." But I noticed something else that night, too. A woman I didn't recognize, an aunt of Emily's, mentioned offhand that Carol had basically been like a second mother to Ryan these past few years, the way he's around so much. I laughed politely and said something about how nice that was. Inside, something tightened. Ryan and I used to talk every week. By that point, we were down to once a month, sometimes less, always initiated by me. I didn't know yet that somewhere in those gaps, a story about me was being written that I never got the chance to read, let alone correct. Linda came over the following weekend, and I finally told her everything. The diner lunch, the toasts, the slow shrinking of my role in a wedding I was supposedly part of. She listened the way she always does, no interrupting, until I ran out of words. "I think you need to just ask Ryan directly," she said. "Not hint. Not wait for him to bring it up. Ask him, am I invited to help plan this wedding or not?" She was right, and I knew it. But there's a particular fear that comes with asking your child a direct question you're afraid to hear the answer to. If you've ever loved someone enough to be scared of their honesty, you know exactly what I mean. I called Ryan that Sunday. He picked up on the 4th ring, sounding rushed. I asked him plainly, was there a plan for my role in the wedding? Was there anything he needed from me? Was everything okay between us? "Everything's fine, Mom," he said. "I've just been really busy. I promise you'll know everything you need to know." It sounded at the time like reassurance. Looking back, it sounds like someone buying time. I told him I loved him. He said it back, quick, like checking a box, and hung up to take another call. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that, feeling something I couldn't yet name. Frank's own son, Tyler, came up for dinner that week. My stepson, 34, living 2 states away, someone Frank had been quietly estranged from since Tyler's mother's remarriage years earlier. It was strange, sitting at that table, watching Frank try so hard with a son who barely met his eyes, while I worried about my own son slipping away in an entirely different direction. It's not the same as your situation, Frank told me later that night, reading my mind the way 20 years of marriage lets a person do. But I understand the feeling. Watching someone you raised decide, slowly, that you're optional. I didn't want to believe that was what was happening with Ryan. I told myself Frank's situation with Tyler was different, deeper wounds, an actual falling out, not just wedding planning noise. But the comparison stuck with me anyway. A week later, Linda called with something odd. Her daughter, my niece Kayla, had run into Emily at a bridal boutique downtown and mentioned, casually, how excited Aunt Diane must be about the wedding. Emily's face, Kayla said, had gone strange for a second. "Oh, right, yeah," Emily had said, too quickly before changing the subject.
It was a small thing.
A flicker. But small things stacked high enough start to look like a wall. I didn't know yet what was actually being built behind it. 2 months before the wedding, I received a text from Ryan. Not a call, a text with a save-the-date graphic and the words, "Details to follow soon. Can't wait for you to be there." I stared at that message for a long time. It was warm. It sounded certain. I told myself I'd overreacted to everything. The toasts, the diner lunch, Emily's strange face at the boutique. I texted back something enthusiastic, hearts and all, and let myself believe things were fine. Linda wasn't as convinced. "Details to follow," she repeated when I read it to her over the phone. "That's not the same as an invitation with your name on it and a time to be there." I told her she was reading too much into wording. Still, weeks passed and no formal invitation ever arrived. No save-the-date card in the mail, no follow-up call about my dress, no request for the family photo list, no seating assignment. Every other detail Ryan mentioned in passing, the band, the menu, the honeymoon in the Smokies, I learned about secondhand from Kayla from a mutual friend on Facebook, never from him directly. I want you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to. Not because it's dramatic. Because it's quiet. The absence didn't announce itself. It just kept not showing up, the way something you're waiting for sometimes simply never arrives, and you're left wondering exactly when it stopped being coming. 3 weeks before the wedding, I finally worked up the courage to call Carol Sanders directly, woman to woman, mother to mother, hoping some plain speaking might clear the air. She was pleasant, almost too pleasant. "Oh, Diane, I'm sure it's all been communicated. You know how these kids are, everything's last minute these days." She laughed, light and easy, the kind of laugh that closes a conversation instead of opening one. I asked if she had a final head count, a schedule, anything I could plan around. "I really think that's something you should get from Ryan," she said, and something in her tone shifted just slightly, cooler, more careful. "I don't want to overstep." I hung up feeling like I'd been handled rather than heard. That night, I tried calling Ryan again. It rang twice and went to voicemail, not the reject and decline kind of quick cutoff, but a real 2 rings, like someone had looked at the screen and let it go. I left a message. I kept my voice steady, told him I loved him, told him I just wanted to know what he needed from me for the big day. He never called back. 3 weeks later, I found out what day the wedding actually was, the same way I found out everything else by then. From a stranger's photograph, on a platform I barely knew how to use, hours after it had already begun. The morning of the wedding, I had no idea it was happening. I spent it doing ordinary things, grocery shopping, a load of laundry, calling my sister about a recipe. Frank was out fixing a neighbor's fence. It was, by every measure, a normal Saturday. Then Jessica Marlowe's photo landed in my feed, and normal ended. I sat down hard on a kitchen chair, phone shaking in my hand, and scrolled through the photographer's public profile. More photos. A first-look shot of Ryan in his suit, hand pressed to his chest like he might cry. A ceremony shot under string lights, Emily's veil catching the late afternoon sun. Guests I recognized from Carol's engagement dinner. Not one photo of me. Not one empty seat marked reserved for a mother who wasn't there because no one told her to come. I called Ryan 4 times. Straight to voicemail every time, the automated kind, not even his own recorded greeting anymore, like the number itself didn't want to hear from me. I called Emily. Same thing. I called Carol. It rang twice and disconnected, the way a call does when someone declines it on purpose. Frank came in from the yard to find me sitting at the table, phone face down. Not crying yet, just very still. "Diane," he said. "What happened?" I turned the phone around and showed him the photo. He read the caption twice before he understood what he was looking at. "Today," he said. "It's happening today?" I nodded. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Linda came over within the hour. I'd called her the second Frank got a look on his face I couldn't stand to sit alone with. She read the caption, scrolled through the photos with a kind of controlled fury I rarely see in her, and then set my phone down flat on the table like it had personally wronged her. "I'm calling Kayla," she said. "She's friends with two of Emily's cousins on Facebook. Somebody knows something." Within 20 minutes, Kayla called back. She'd messaged one of the cousins who confirmed it. Yes, the wedding was today at Hartwell Barn out near Sugar Creek. Small guest list, close family and friends only. The invitation had gone out almost 2 months earlier. 2 months. I sat with that number until it stopped making sense as a number and just became a weight in my chest. Did they say anything about me? I asked Kayla through the phone, and I heard how small my own voice sounded, like I was 9 years old again, asking if I'd been picked for a team. There was a pause. "The cousins said she just figured you weren't close with that side of the family," Kayla said carefully. She didn't seem to think it was strange, like it was just how things were. That was somehow worse than any explanation I could have imagined. Not a scandal, not a fight, just an absence so complete that strangers had already filled in a story to explain it, one where I simply wasn't part of the picture at all. That evening, I finally reached a real, live human voice. Not Ryan, not Carol, but my niece Kayla's friend, one of Emily's bridesmaids, who I'd met once at the cookout years earlier and who, thank God, still had my number saved. She sounded uncomfortable the second she realized who was calling. "Mrs. Whitfield, hi, is everything okay?" I asked her, as gently as I could manage with my hands still shaking, whether she knew why I hadn't been told about the wedding. Her answer came slowly, like she was choosing each word with tweezers. I thought you knew there'd been some tension. Ryan mentioned a while back that things were complicated on your end." I didn't want to pry. "Complicated how?" I asked. "I honestly don't know the details," she said. "I just know Carol mentioned something about a voicemail months ago. Something you'd said that upset Emily pretty badly. I don't know exactly what it was, and honestly, it's not really my place." A voicemail. I hadn't left Emily a voicemail in longer than I could remember. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there turning that single word over and over, voicemail, trying to find it in my memory and coming up with absolutely nothing. If you've ever been blamed for something you can't even remember doing, you know that particular flavor of helplessness. I was about to learn just how deep it went. I didn't sleep that night. Around 11, Frank found me at the kitchen table with an old shoebox pulled down from my closet, not because I thought it held answers, but because I needed to hold something that still made sense. The box was full of old photographs, ticket stubs, a lock of Ryan's hair from his first haircut, and near the bottom, a stack of sealed envelopes I hadn't touched in years, letters Michael had written to Ryan in the last 2 years of his life, meant to be given to him one at a time as he grew older. Michael's idea, back when we still thought we had decades to carry it out slowly. I'd never given Ryan a single one. The right moment had never seemed to arrive, and then too much time had passed, and giving them felt like reopening a wound instead of healing one. Frank sat down across from me and looked at the box for a long time without saying anything. "You never told him these exist," he said finally. Not an accusation. Just a fact laid gently on the table between us. "I know," I said. "Diane." His voice was careful. "How many things have you been holding on to, waiting for the right moment, that Ryan doesn't even know are there?" I didn't have an answer for him. I still don't, not fully. But that question sat in my chest for the rest of that terrible night, next to the one I couldn't shake either. What voicemail, and what had I supposedly said that had cost me my son's wedding day? 2 days after the wedding, Ryan finally called. Not to explain, not really, just a short, clipped conversation, the kind you have with someone you're trying not to actually talk to.
"Mom,
I heard you've been trying to reach me and Emily. We're back from the honeymoon prep stuff. Things have just been really hectic. Ryan. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I found out about your wedding from a photographer's Instagram post. I wasn't invited to my own son's wedding. Silence on the line. Then, quieter. I thought you knew. Knew what? That we needed some space. After what you said. What I said, I repeated. Ryan, I need you to tell me exactly what you think I said. Because I have no idea what you're talking about. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge I'd never heard him use with me before. Carol played me the voicemail, Mom. Back in the spring. You calling Emily's family gold diggers, saying you didn't think the marriage would last, that Emily was only after. I'm not even going to repeat the rest of it.
The floor seemed to tilt under me.
Ryan, I swear to you, I never left that voicemail. I have never said one word like that about Emily in my life. Mom. His voice cracked slightly, the first real crack I'd heard. I heard your voice. I heard it. He hung up before I could say anything else. I sat with the phone in my lap for what felt like an hour, trying to make sense of something that made no sense at all. I had never left a voicemail like that. I had never even had a private conversation about Emily that wasn't warm, that wasn't hopeful, that wasn't exactly the kind of thing a mother says about a woman making her son happy. Frank found me still sitting there when he came in from the garage. I told him everything Ryan had said. He went very quiet, the particular quiet he gets when he's turning something over carefully before he speaks. Diane, he said slowly, do you remember a while back when your old phone got hacked? That scam call situation, right after we changed our number because of all those spam calls. I did remember. It had been almost a year ago, dozens of robocalls, a fraud alert on one of my accounts, enough of a mess that we'd finally changed our home and cell numbers entirely, something I mentioned to Ryan in passing but never followed up on directly, assuming he'd simply update his contacts the way people do. You think someone used my old number? I said slowly. Or faked it somehow. I think, Frank said carefully, that you need to actually hear whatever recording Carol played him. Not secondhand. Not through Ryan's memory of it. The actual thing. If you've ever been accused of something you know you didn't do, you understand the particular helplessness of not even being able to picture the crime scene. I needed to hear that voicemail with my own ears. And I had no idea, yet, how I was going to get anyone to let me. I called Emily directly the next morning, my first attempt at going around Ryan and Carol entirely, straight to the person actually getting married, the one person I hadn't yet spoken to since all of this began. She picked up. That alone surprised me. Emily, I said, keeping my voice as calm and even as I could manage. I'm not calling to cause trouble. I just need to understand something. Ryan said there was a voicemail from me. That upset you. I need you to know I never left it. I need to understand what you actually heard. There was a long pause. When Emily finally spoke, her voice was smaller than I expected, almost hesitant. I never actually heard it myself, Diane.
My mom told me about it.
She said it upset her so much she couldn't even play it for me directly, that it was too hurtful to listen to twice. Something cold moved through my chest. So, you've never heard this voicemail either? No, Emily said slowly, like she was hearing the shape of the problem for the first time out loud. I just trusted her. She said it was bad. She said you'd called her a gold digger and said the marriage wouldn't last. I was devastated. I didn't want it hanging over the wedding, so I just let it be handled quietly. Emily, I said, has anyone actually played that recording for anyone? Or has everyone just been told what's on it? The silence that followed answered the question before she did. I need to hear it, Emily said, and I could hear something shifting in her voice. Not defensiveness anymore, but a kind of dawning unease. I never thought to ask. My mom's always been so protective of me since my dad passed. I just believed her. She told me she'd call me back. 3 hours passed. When she finally did, her voice sounded different, tighter, more careful. My mom says she deleted it, Emily said. Right after she played it for Ryan. She said it was too painful to keep. I felt something in me go very still. An audio recording, supposedly damning enough to end a mother's relationship with her son on his wedding day, conveniently existing only in secondhand descriptions and then deleted before anyone else could verify it. Emily, I said carefully, do you find that as strange as I do? There was a long silence. I don't know what to think anymore, she admitted. I've never once heard you say anything unkind about me. Not at the cookout, not at the engagement dinner, not ever. I actually thought you liked me. I love you already, Emily, I said and meant it. I have from the beginning. I would never have said what your mother claims I said. I don't even know how she'd have my old voicemail box to begin with. I changed that number almost a year ago. Another silence. Then, quietly, my mom has Ryan's old phone. The one with your old number saved in it. She's been helping him back up his contacts for the wedding stuff.
Something was starting to take shape.
I didn't like the shape of it at all. That night, Linda sat with me at the kitchen table while I laid out everything Emily had told me, piece by piece, like evidence on a table I wasn't sure I wanted to look at directly. So no one has actually heard this voicemail, Linda said slowly. Carol told Ryan about it. Carol told Emily about it. Carol deleted it before anyone else could listen. And Carol just so happened to have access to Ryan's old phone, with your old number sitting right there in his contacts. It sounds insane when you say it like that, I said. It sounds insane because it might genuinely be exactly what happened, Linda said. Diane, think about everything you've told me about this woman since the beginning. Every toast about Emily's father, nothing about Michael. Every planning detail routed through her instead of you. The way she talked at that cookout about being the only parent Emily's ever needed. I thought about Frank's word from months earlier. Hooks. I thought about how many small moments I'd excused, one at a time, each one reasonable on its own, until they added up to something with a shape I hadn't wanted to see. You think she made it up, I said.
The whole voicemail.
Just invented it. I think, Linda said carefully, that a woman who spent years being the only mother figure in her daughter's life might not have handled the idea of sharing that role very well. And I think you need to find a way to actually talk to Ryan, not through Carol, not through Emily secondhand, face-to-face before this gets any further from the truth. I drove to Ryan's apartment 3 days later, unannounced, my hands sweating on the wheel the entire way. Frank offered to come with me. I told him I needed to do this alone. Ryan opened the door looking tired, still faintly sunburned from the honeymoon, surprise flickering across his face when he saw me standing there.
Mom.
I wasn't expecting. I know, I said. Can I come in for 10 minutes? Just 10 minutes and then I'll go, and you never have to see me again, if that's really what you want. He hesitated, then stepped aside. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, not at first. I simply asked him one question. Have you ever, with your own 2 ears, heard this voicemail Carol says I left? He opened his mouth to answer automatically, then stopped. I watched something shift behind his eyes, the first real crack of doubt I'd seen since this whole thing started. No, he admitted slowly. She played it for me once on speaker from her phone. It was quick. I was upset. I didn't ask to hear it again. Ryan, I said, I changed my phone number almost a year ago. I have never called Emily's phone in my life. I don't have her number saved, and I never did. Ask your provider. Ask anyone. There is no version of reality where I left that message. He sat down slowly on the arm of his couch, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time in months, he actually looked at me, not through the fog of whatever story he'd been told, but at me, his mother, standing in his doorway with nothing to hide. Then whose voice was it? He asked quietly. Because I swear to you, Mom, it sounded exactly like you. That single sentence, it sounded exactly like you, sat between us for a long moment, heavy enough that neither of us moved to fill the silence. Play me something, I finally said. Anything. A video of Carol talking, anything with her voice on it, that you have saved. Ryan pulled up an old video from his phone. Carol giving a toast at the engagement dinner, her voice warm and clear through the tinny phone speaker. I listened carefully, and something in the back of my mind clicked into place, quiet and cold. There was a particular cadence to how Carol spoke, an old-fashioned formality mixed with a slight Midwestern flatness on certain vowels, not unlike my own voice, actually, now that I was really listening. We were close enough in age. Close enough in region. Not identical, but close enough, on a bad recording, played once, quickly, to someone already primed to believe the worst. Ryan, I said carefully, is it possible that voicemail wasn't from a call at all? That it was something recorded or altered or… Mom, don't, he said, but there was less conviction in it now than there had been a week earlier. That's a pretty serious thing to accuse someone of. I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet, I said. I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, the story you were told isn't the only possible explanation for what happened. I'm asking you to want the truth as badly as I do. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't ask me to leave either. Before I left his apartment, Ryan told me something that stopped me at the door. There's something else, he said. Something I never told you because I didn't think it mattered at the time. About 6 months ago, Carol sat me down and told me she'd overheard you, at some family gathering years ago, saying you never really wanted me to remarry. I mean, that you never wanted me to get remarried at all, that you thought Emily's family would try to take over, that I'd lose my connection to my own dad's side of things if I let them in too much. I felt the air go out of me. Ryan, I never said anything like that. Not to Carol. Not to anyone. I've never even had a conversation with her about your father. I know that now, probably, he said quietly. But at the time, it fit. Because you and Frank never really talked about Dad much after you two got married, and some part of me had always wondered if you wanted to just move past that whole part of our lives. It made a certain kind of sense. That landed harder than almost anything else that day, because it wasn't really about Carol at all. It was about an old wound of Ryan's, one I hadn't fully realized I'd left unattended for years. The silence after Michael's death. The awkwardness after Frank. The shoebox in my closet with letters Ryan didn't even know existed. Carol hadn't invented an enemy out of nothing. She'd found a crack that was already there, one I'd helped create myself, and widened it exactly enough to fit her own purposes through. I drove home that night with more clarity than I'd had in weeks, and also more grief, because understanding how something happened doesn't undo the fact that it did. Linda was waiting when I got back, and I told her everything Ryan had said, including the part about Michael, about the years of silence Ryan had misread as me trying to erase his father. You have to give him those letters, Linda said immediately. Diane, if there was ever a moment for those, it's now. Not to win an argument. Not as evidence of anything. Just because he needs to know his father was thinking about him, planning for him, all those years ago. I wasn't ready. I told her so. You weren't ready 7 years ago either, she said gently, and here we are anyway. That night, I opened the shoebox again and read the outside of each envelope, in Michael's careful handwriting, for Ryan's 16th birthday, for Ryan's high school graduation, for Ryan's wedding day. I hadn't remembered that last one existed. I sat on my bedroom floor holding it for a long time, an envelope that had been sitting in my closet the entire day Ryan got married without me, meant for exactly the occasion I'd missed. If you've ever held on to something important for so long that the holding itself became its own kind of hiding, you understand what that envelope felt like in my hands that night, both a gift and an accusation, aimed squarely at myself. I decided, finally, it was time to stop protecting Ryan from his father's absence, and start letting him have what little presence Michael had managed to leave behind. I called Ryan the next morning and asked if I could come by again, not to talk about Carol, not to talk about the wedding, but to give him something that had nothing to do with any of it. He agreed, sounding wary but curious. I brought the shoebox. I set it on his coffee table and explained what it was, his father's handwriting, sealed envelopes meant for milestones, most of which I'd let pass without ever handing them over, out of some misguided instinct to protect him from grief, instead of letting him carry a piece of his father through it. Ryan stared at the box for a long moment before he reached for it. There's one for my wedding, I said quietly. I found it again last night. I should have given it to you months ago, whether or not any of this other mess had happened. That one's on me, and only me. He opened it slowly, careful with the aged paper, and read it silently while I sat there, not knowing whether to look at him or look away. When he finished, his eyes were wet, and he didn't say anything for a long time. He knew, Ryan said finally, voice rough. He wrote here that he hoped whoever I married would understand what it meant that you never remarried out of convenience, that you waited 7 years, that you only did it because you found someone who was actually good to both of us. He wrote that he trusted you completely with the rest of my life. I hadn't known what was in that letter. I'd never read it. It undid me more than I expected, hearing Michael's faith in me spoken back through our son's voice, at the exact moment I'd needed it most, and hadn't known how to ask for it. That letter cracked something open in Ryan that Carol's version of events had kept sealed shut. He didn't apologize that day. It was too soon, too raw, too much all at once. But something in how he looked at me had changed. I need to actually talk to Emily about all of this, he said. Really talk. Not just let my mother-in-law manage the conversation for us. He called Emily while I was still there, and I listened to half a conversation that told me plenty, his voice steady but urgent, hers rising in pitch on the other end, both of them clearly circling the same uncomfortable question neither had asked out loud until now. What exactly had Carol told each of them, and had any of it actually been true? After he hung up, Ryan looked at me and said, Emily wants to talk to her mom directly tonight. Ask her to produce the actual recording or admit there isn't one. That's brave of her, I said. She loves her mom, Ryan said. This isn't easy for her either. Carol's been the only real family Emily's had since her dad died. If this turns out to be what we think it is, it's going to break something in that relationship too. I understood that better than he probably realized. I thought of Frank and Tyler, of the version of estrangement that happened slowly, through nobody meaning any real harm, just fear and grief finding the wrong places to hide. None of this has to end with someone getting completely cut out, I told him. Sometimes people do a terrible thing for an understandable reason, and there's still a way through it, if everyone's willing to actually look at what happened instead of just picking a side. I didn't know yet how true, or how difficult, that sentence would turn out to be. Emily called me herself 2 days later, her voice thin and shaky in a way I hadn't heard before. I confronted her, she said. Asked her to play me the voicemail, in front of me, right then. She kept stalling, said her phone had glitched, said she needed to check her cloud backup, said all kinds of things that didn't add up. Finally, I just asked her outright, did you actually record that yourself? There was a long pause on the line before Emily continued. She didn't answer at first. Then she started crying and told me she used a voice app, one of those AI voice generator things, the kind people use for pranks online, trained on old videos from your Facebook, birthday messages you'd posted publicly years ago. She said she never meant for it to go this far. She said she just wanted more time. Fewer people around, for the wedding, for after. She said she was scared of losing me to a bigger family. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something that wasn't quite vindication and wasn't quite pity, but some uncomfortable mixture of both. Emily, I said carefully, I'm not going to pretend that doesn't make me angry. It cost me my son's wedding day. But I need you to hear me say this clearly. I don't think your mother is a monster. I think she's a woman who's been scared and alone longer than any of us realized, and she found an ugly way to hold on to the one thing she has left. Emily was crying too by then. I don't know how to forgive this, she said. But I also don't know how to lose her over it. You may not have to choose only one of those things, I told her gently. Sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering the truth. It's figuring out what to do with it once you finally have it. Carol called me herself, 3 days after Emily's confession, and I almost didn't answer. I did, eventually. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. None of the polished ease from the engagement dinner, none of the careful deflection from our phone call weeks earlier. I owe you an apology, she said. A real one, not an excuse dressed up as one, though I understand if you don't believe that yet. I let her keep talking. My husband died when Emily was in college, she said. For 6 years, it's been just the two of us. I built my whole life around being enough for her, the only parent she needed, the only family that mattered. When Ryan came along, I told myself I was happy for her. And some part of me was. But another part of me was terrified. Terrified of becoming the extra person in the room. The mother-in-law nobody really needs, once there's a whole other family to belong to. So you invented a version of me that was easy to push out, I said quietly. I told myself it wasn't really about you, Carol admitted. I told myself I was protecting Emily from tension I imagined existed. But underneath that, yes, I think I wanted there to be less room at that wedding so there'd be more room left for me. If you've ever done something you're ashamed of out of fear instead of malice, you understand the strange relief in finally hearing someone else name that fear out loud, even when it's the person you have every right to be furious with. I'm not ready to forgive you, I told her honestly. But I believe you're telling me the truth, finally. That has to count for something. The days after Carol's confession were strange, quiet in a different way than the silence before it. Ryan called more often, sometimes just to talk, no agenda, the way he used to when he was younger. Emily texted me directly for the first time, a photo of a wedding dress alteration gone wrong, a small joke, an olive branch disguised as small talk. But there was a harder conversation still ahead, the one about consequences, about what happens after the truth comes out but before anyone's actually healed from it. Linda, ever practical, asked the question none of us had voiced yet. So, what happens now? Do you get a redo? Do you just absorb this? I didn't have an answer. Frank, quiet as always until the moment he isn't, offered his own perspective from the Tyler situation. You don't get the actual day back, he said. I never got back the years I lost with my son over something just as avoidable, just as small once you look at it honestly. What you get is what comes after. And that's not nothing, Diane. That's actually the only part that was ever really yours to build. I thought about Michael's letter, sitting now with Ryan instead of hidden in my closet. I thought about how long I'd let a story sit unspoken between us, that I might not love Frank as much as I'd loved Michael, that I might be trying to move past Ryan's father instead of honoring him, a story Ryan had believed for years without either of us ever saying it plainly out loud. Carol's lie had done real damage. But it had also, strangely, forced open a conversation Ryan and I had needed to have long before any wedding, any Instagram post, any voicemail that never actually existed. 2 weeks after the truth came out, Ryan asked if he and Emily could come over for dinner. Not a big gesture, not a grand reconciliation, just dinner, the ordinary kind we used to have before any of this began. I made his favorite, pot roast, the recipe Michael's mother had taught me, the same one I'd made every Sunday for years after Michael died, back when it was just the two of us at that same table. Ryan noticed immediately. This is Grandma Whitfield's recipe, he said, something soft moving across his face. It is, I said. I haven't made it in a long time. Felt like the right night for it. Emily was quiet for most of dinner, clearly still carrying the weight of her mother's confession, still working through what it meant to love someone who'd done something this deliberate. At one point, she looked at me and said, quietly, I keep thinking about all those months I thought you didn't want me in the family. I believed that so completely. I'm sorry I never once tried to hear it from you directly. I understand why you didn't, I told her. You trusted the person who'd never given you a reason not to until now. That's not something you did wrong. That's just what trust looks like before it's been tested. Ryan reached over and took my hand at the table, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. I should have called you the morning of the wedding, he said. Voicemail or no voicemail. I should have made sure myself that you knew. That's on me too, Mom. Not just Carol. It wasn't a full repair yet, but it was finally an honest beginning. Not everything resolved as gently. Carol and Emily's relationship remained badly strained. Emily needed space, real space, to figure out how much of her mother's love she could still trust after learning how far she'd gone to keep it intact. Carol, to her credit, didn't fight that space. She apologized once, plainly, and then stepped back, which told me more about her than any of her earlier explanations had. Linda and I talked about it one evening on my porch, watching the sun go down over Larchmere Avenue the way we had 100 times before. You know what strikes me, Linda said, is that Carol's fear and your silence about Michael's letters came from almost the exact same place. Both of you were scared of losing something you loved, and both of you chose secrecy instead of just saying the hard, true thing out loud. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Carol had hidden a lie to protect a bond she was afraid of losing. I had hidden a truth, Michael's letters, my own grief, my own uncertainty about how much space Frank could take up in a family that used to be just Ryan and me, for almost exactly the same reason. The difference, Linda added gently, is that you're the one who chose to open the box eventually. That matters, Diane. That's the whole difference, really. I sat with that a long time after she left. The wedding day was gone, unrecoverable, a hole that would probably always sit somewhere in both Ryan's memory and mine. But something else had opened in its place, a willingness, finally on both our parts, to stop protecting each other from the truth and start actually trusting each other with it. The real twist, when it finally landed in full, wasn't just Carol's fabricated voicemail. It was what Ryan discovered afterward, digging back through old messages trying to understand exactly how deep it had gone. He found it 3 weeks after the wedding, while helping Emily clean out her mother's old email account for a joint file transfer. Buried in a folder labeled Wedding Logistics, there was an email thread from over a year earlier, long before the fake voicemail, long before any of the toasts or engagement dinners. Carol had emailed a wedding planner asking, quite plainly, how to keep the guest list intimate on the groom's side, particularly if his mother's relationship with the family could be minimized without seeming rude. The planner had responded with polite, practical suggestions, smaller save-the-dates, informal verbal invitations that could later be framed as miscommunications if questioned. It wasn't an accident or a single moment of fear giving way to a lie. It had been planned, slowly, for over a year, long before there was ever a voicemail to fabricate, long before Emily and Ryan had even set a date. Ryan showed me the emails himself, his hands trembling slightly as he scrolled. "I thought it was one bad decision," he said. "I didn't realize it was the plan the whole time." I felt something harden in me reading those words, something I hadn't let myself feel even after Carol's tearful phone call. Because a moment of fear, I could understand. A year-long strategy to erase a mother from her son's wedding was something else entirely. "She didn't just lie to keep peace," I said quietly. "She built the entire wedding around making sure I wasn't in it." Ryan confronted Carol with the emails himself, Emily standing beside him this time, no longer willing to let her mother's version of events go unquestioned. Carol didn't deny it. That, at least, was something. "I told myself it was practical," she said, her voice flat now, stripped of its earlier polish. "That a smaller wedding was simpler, cleaner. I told myself the guest list logistics were just logistics. But you're right. Somewhere in there, I stopped pretending it was about simplicity and started making it about keeping her out entirely." "Why?" Emily asked, and I could hear how much that single word cost her. Carol was quiet for a long moment. "Because your father used to say I mothered too hard," she finally said. "That I held on too tight. After he died, I promised myself I'd never let anyone take you further away from me than grief already had. When Ryan came along, and then Diane, someone with her own history with him, her own claim on him, some old, ugly part of me decided the safest thing was to make sure there was less room in the picture. Not because Diane did anything wrong. Because I was terrified of becoming unnecessary. It wasn't an excuse. Nobody in that room treated it as one. But it was, finally, the truth. Not a single panicked lie, but a long, quiet campaign born out of a grief Carol had never actually dealt with, one that had curdled into control instead of healing. "I don't expect you to forgive me quickly," Carol said, looking between Emily and Ryan, and finally, briefly at me. "I just needed you all to know I'm not hiding anything else. This is everything." I didn't say much in that conversation. I'd said what I needed to weeks earlier, and I could see that this particular reckoning belonged more to Ryan and Emily than to me. But afterward, alone with Ryan on my porch, he finally said the thing I think both of us had been circling for weeks. "I should have trusted you over her," he said. "I let a story about you being difficult, being controlling about Dad, being someone who might not fully accept Emily. I let all of that sit in my head for months, without ever once giving you the chance to answer it directly. I chose the version of events that required less from me. That was easier than admitting Carol might be the problem, and it was easier than facing whatever was actually unresolved between you and me about Dad." "You were grieving in your own way," I said. "You lost your father at 12. Then you watched me build a new life with Frank, and some part of you never fully worked through what that meant for the space your dad still held. I didn't help. I let those letters sit in a box instead of giving you a way to actually keep him close." "Why didn't you?" he asked, and it wasn't accusatory, just genuinely curious, finally, after years of both of us avoiding the question. Because every time I thought about giving them to you, it felt like reopening a wound I couldn't be sure would heal cleanly, I admitted. So, I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, when really I think I was just afraid. Of your grief. Of my own. We sat with that admission together, quiet, honest, more connected in that silence than we'd been in years of careful, surface-level phone calls. The following week, Ryan asked if we could visit Michael's grave together, something we hadn't done side by side in years, not since he was a teenager, back when Frank was still new and Ryan still couldn't quite look at either of us without some old grief surfacing. We stood there a long time in the quiet of the cemetery, the late afternoon light slanting low across the headstones. I used to come here alone sometimes, Ryan admitted. Tell him things I didn't know how to tell you. About Emily, about the wedding stress, about feeling like I didn't have enough family left to make it feel like it was really happening the right way.
I didn't know that, I said.
I never told you a lot of things, he said. I think some part of me thought keeping Dad's memory separate from you, and Frank was the only way to keep it mine. Like sharing it with you would mean giving it up somehow. I thought about the letter he'd read weeks earlier, Michael's own words about trusting me completely, about hoping whoever Ryan married would understand the kind of woman I was. I thought about how long that trust had been sitting, sealed and silent, in a box in my closet, while Ryan built an entire private grief around the idea that I might be trying to erase his father instead. Your dad's not something you have to protect from me, I told him quietly. He's not something either of us has to hold alone anymore. There's room for all of it, him, me, Frank, Emily, everyone. That's not betrayal, Ryan. That's just what a family that keeps growing is supposed to look like. He nodded, wiping his eyes, and for the first time since that terrible Instagram photo, I felt something in my chest that wasn't grief at all. It felt, unmistakably, like hope. Emily called me a few days later, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I've been thinking about something, she said. The wedding we had, it wasn't really the wedding either of us wanted, not fully. Not with everything that was actually going on underneath it. What if we did something small, just for the people who actually deserved to be there, to make up for what got lost? I told her she didn't owe me anything like that. I know, she said. I want to do it anyway, not to erase what happened, just to build something true on top of it. Ryan got on the phone a moment later, and together they told me their plan, a small vow renewal, 6 weeks out, at Michael's favorite spot along the river where he used to take Ryan fishing as a boy, a detail Ryan remembered, and Emily had insisted on the moment she heard it. Just us, Ryan said. You, Frank, Linda, a few real friends. No caterers, no photographer with a public Instagram account. A small, rueful laugh followed that last part, the first real joke either of us had managed to make about any of this. I cried after I hung up, not the sharp, cold grief of the wedding day itself, but something gentler, something closer to relief. It wasn't a redo. Nothing could actually give me back the moment I'd lost, the vows I hadn't witnessed, the dress I never got to see in person before it walked down an aisle without me watching. But it was unmistakably an offering, a chance to build a new memory in the same space where the old wound had opened, instead of simply walking away from the hole it had left behind. I called Carol before the small ceremony, unsure exactly why I felt compelled to, except that some part of me understood we were now bound together whether either of us liked it or not, through Ryan, through Emily, through whatever family we were all still in the process of becoming. I'm not calling to invite you, I told her honestly. I don't think either of us is ready for that yet. I'm calling because I think you should know it's happening, and because I don't want you finding out secondhand, the way I found out about the actual wedding. There was a long pause on the line. That's more grace than I probably deserve, Carol said quietly. Maybe, I said. I'm not doing it for your sake, particularly. I'm doing it because I don't want to become the kind of person who repeats what was done to me, even accidentally, even out of hurt that's still fresh. For what it's worth, Carol said, Emily told me a little about the letters. About Michael. I think in some strange way, hearing about that helped me understand my own fear a little better. You'd been carrying something similar, just from a different direction. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet, maybe not ever fully. But it was an honest exchange between two women who'd both let old grief curdle into decisions they weren't proud of, mine quiet and passive, hers active and damaging, but rooted, I was coming to understand, in something not entirely dissimilar. Maybe someday, I told her, we find our way to being simply two grandmothers in the same family, instead of two women measuring how much room the other one is allowed to take up. She didn't answer right away. But she didn't disagree either, and for now, that felt like enough. The 6 weeks before the small ceremony passed differently than I expected. Not easily, exactly, but steadily, each week adding a little more solid ground beneath what had nearly collapsed entirely. Ryan called every Sunday again, the way he used to before things drifted. Sometimes just to talk about nothing. A work project, a home repair, the kind of small, ordinary conversation that had been missing for longer than I'd let myself admit. One Sunday, he brought up Frank unprompted. I owe him an apology, too, Ryan said. I've spent years treating him like he was in the way of something instead of just someone who showed up and stayed when he didn't have to. Frank, when I told him, was quiet for a long moment before he said, simply, I never needed an apology. I just needed him to know the door was open whenever he was ready to walk through it. That Sunday dinner, when Ryan finally said the words directly to Frank, I'm sorry I made you feel like an outsider in your own house for years, I watched something ease in Frank's shoulders that I hadn't realized had been tense for a very long time. It made me think of Tyler, Frank's own estranged son, still 2 states away, still mostly silent. I asked Frank, gently, if watching Ryan find his way back might make him want to try reaching out to Tyler again. Maybe, Frank said. Maybe it's time I stop waiting for him to make the first move, the way I always secretly hoped Ryan would with you. It was a small thing, a single sentence over dinner, but it planted something in all of us, the idea that reaching out first, even after real hurt, might be worth the risk more often than any of us had been willing to admit. Frank called Tyler 2 days later. I wasn't in the room, but I heard enough of it through the wall to understand it wasn't an easy conversation. Long silences, Frank's voice cracking at one point in a way I'd rarely heard in 20 years of marriage. When he came to find me afterward, his eyes were red but his shoulders looked lighter than they had in years. He's coming for Thanksgiving, Frank said. First time in 6 years. I squeezed his hand, thinking of how strange it was. That Ryan's slow return to me had somehow cracked open the door to Frank's own long estrangement, 2 separate wounds in the same house finally starting to heal at roughly the same time, as if grief and repair both moved through a family in waves instead of straight lines. Linda, when I told her, laughed softly. Funny how that works, she said. You spend years assuming your pain is separate from everyone else's, and then it turns out half the people around you are carrying some version of the exact same ache. I thought about Carol too, in that same light, her fear of becoming unnecessary once Emily had enough family. Frank's fear that reaching out to Tyler first might mean facing rejection he couldn't survive again. My own fear that giving Ryan his father's letters would break something rather than mend it. All of us, it turned out, had been protecting ourselves from the exact same kind of loss, just wearing different disguises. The difference, now, was that one by one, we were finally choosing to risk it anyway. 2 weeks before the small river ceremony, Ryan asked if he could see the rest of his father's letters, not just the wedding one. All of them, whatever was left in that shoebox I'd been guarding for 17 years. We sat together at my kitchen table and opened them one at a time, in order, the way Michael had intended all along. The 16th birthday letter talked about the importance of learning to drive carefully and made an old joke about Ryan's terrible middle school haircut that made us both laugh out loud, the first easy laugh we'd shared together in longer than either of us wanted to admit. The graduation letter was quieter, more serious. Michael's hopes for the kind of man Ryan would become, his hope that Ryan would always find his way back to the people who loved him, even after hard seasons apart. He knew there'd be hard seasons, Ryan said softly, reading that line twice. He knew people drift, I said. He just believed, always, that the people who really loved each other found their way back eventually. He used to say that to me too back before the accident. That love isn't measured by how close you stay. It's measured by whether you're willing to close the distance again, once you notice it's opened up. Ryan folded that letter carefully and set it with the others. A small, growing collection of his father's voice finally returned to him after all these years. "Thank you for finally giving me these," he said. "Even later than you should have. I understand now why it took what it took to get here." A week before the river ceremony, Emily called and asked if I would help her with something small but meaningful. She wanted to include a nod to Michael in the vow renewal, something quiet, not performative, just a way of acknowledging the family she was marrying into included someone who'd never gotten the chance to meet her, but whose love had clearly shaped the man she'd chosen. "I don't want it to feel forced," she said. "I just want him to be there, somehow, even if it's small." We settled on something simple. She and Ryan would exchange rings using the small ring box Michael had once given me, the one I still had from our own wedding decades earlier, repurposed now for a new beginning instead of tucked away as an old memory nobody used anymore. Emily cried a little when I told her the story behind it, how Michael had found that particular box at an estate sale months before our wedding, insisting it was built to hold something that mattered for a long time. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you for trusting me with something that means so much to you." "You're not taking it from me," I told her. "You're helping me use it the way it was always meant to be used, for a family that keeps growing, instead of a memory that just sits still." I thought, hanging up the phone that evening, about how far we'd all come from that terrible Saturday morning, the cold shock of a stranger's photo, the silence, the accusations, the fear. None of it had disappeared entirely, but somewhere in the aftermath, something new and sturdier had begun quietly taking its place. 3 days before the ceremony, Ryan asked me the question I'd been quietly waiting for since this whole ordeal began. "Are you angry at me, Mom? For believing her over you, for as long as I did?" I thought carefully before answering because I wanted to give him something true, not just something comforting. "I was angry," I admitted. "For a while, very angry. But anger isn't really the thing I want to leave you with, Ryan. What I want you to understand is that Carol didn't invent your doubts about me out of nothing. She found real cracks. My silence about your father, my own fear of what sharing him with Frank might mean, years of small omissions that made room for her story to take root. I'm not saying that excuses what she did. It doesn't. But it means I'm not entirely blameless in how far it got either." "I should have asked you directly, though," Ryan said. "Long before any of this. I let assumptions build instead of just picking up the phone and asking my own mother if she really felt the way I'd been told she felt." "We both did that," I said. "For years, actually, long before Carol ever entered the picture. That's probably the real lesson in all of this, if there is one. Not that people can lie to you. Everyone already knows that's possible. The harder lesson is how much room we all leave for those lies to live in, whenever we're too afraid to ask the people we love the direct, uncomfortable questions." Ryan nodded slowly, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. Some understandings don't require more words once they've finally been spoken plainly, just space to settle. The night before the ceremony, Linda came by to help me pick out something to wear, the same way she had for my own wedding to Michael decades earlier. "You know," she said, holding up a soft blue dress against me in the mirror, "when you called me that Saturday, the day of the actual wedding, I honestly didn't know if this was something that could be repaired. Some things break in a way that just doesn't come back together." "Did you think that this time?" I asked. "For about a week," she admitted. "But then I watched you open that shoebox instead of hiding from it. I watched you choose honesty with Ryan even when it would have been easier to just be angry and let him come to you eventually, in his own time, on his own terms. That's what changed it, Diane. Not the truth about Carol coming out. Your willingness to meet Ryan halfway with your own truth, at the exact moment you had every right to just demand an apology and wait." I thought about that as I got dressed the next morning, how easy it would have been to simply be the wronged party, to let Ryan do all the repairing while I stood back, arms crossed, waiting for enough contrition to satisfy me. How tempting that had been some days, in the rawest weeks after the wedding. But Michael's letters had taught me something different. That love, real love, the kind that survives grief and distance and other people's fear, requires someone willing to close the gap first, over and over, for as long as it takes. I hadn't done that well enough for years. This was, finally, my chance to do it properly. The morning of the small river ceremony was clear and cool, early autumn light slanting gold across the water, where Michael used to take Ryan fishing on quiet Saturday mornings, back when Ryan still called him Dad in the present tense instead of the past. There were only 12 of us there, Ryan and Emily, Frank and me, Linda, a handful of close friends, and Emily's aunt, who'd come instead of Carol, at Emily's request, giving her mother the space she still needed to sit with everything that had happened. Ryan wore the same suit from the actual wedding day, a small, deliberate choice, he told me later, meant to reclaim something that had felt tainted by everything surrounding it the first time. When it came time to exchange rings, Ryan opened the small box that had once been mine and Michael's, and something in his voice caught as he explained its history to the small gathered circle, how his father had found it decades earlier, how his mother had kept it all these years, how it now held a new promise instead of just an old memory. I watched Emily's eyes fill with tears as she listened, and I felt something in my own chest finally loosen, a knot I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying since that terrible Saturday morning weeks earlier. This wasn't the wedding I'd imagined for my son, all those years raising him alone, hoping fiercely that he'd someday find someone who loved him well. But standing there by that river, watching him promise himself again to a woman who'd chosen, finally, to fight for the truth alongside him, I understood something simple and important. The day itself hadn't been perfect, but what came after it, slowly and honestly built, might turn out to matter more than the day ever could have on its own. After the ceremony, we all gathered at a long table set up near the water for a simple meal. Nothing catered, nothing elaborate, just food everyone had brought themselves, the way family gatherings used to look before anyone worried about how they'd photograph. Frank stood at one point and raised his glass, and I watched Ryan's face carefully as Frank spoke. "I'm not this family's first father," Frank said simply. "I know that, and I've always known it. But I've been lucky enough to be part of it for a long time now, and today, watching Ryan choose to build something honest instead of something easy, I've never been prouder to call him my son too, in whatever way he'll let me." Ryan stood, unprompted, and hugged Frank tightly, the first real embrace I'd seen between them in years, the kind that isn't performed for anyone watching, just two people finally letting an old, unnecessary distance close. Later, sitting by the water with Ryan while Emily and the others talked nearby, he turned to me and said quietly, "I keep thinking about how differently this could have gone. If I hadn't found those emails. If Emily hadn't pushed her mom to actually produce the recording. If you'd just given up trying to reach me after the wedding, the way some people probably would have, after being shut out like that." I thought about giving up, I admitted honestly, more than once in those first few days. But I kept thinking about your father's letter, the one about people finding their way back to each other, no matter how far the distance had grown. I decided I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. "I'm glad you didn't give up," Ryan said. "I don't think I deserved that, honestly. Not after how long I let the silence between us grow before any of this happened." "You're my son," I told him simply. "There isn't a version of this where I stop trying to close that distance, Ryan. Not now, not ever." In the weeks that followed the ceremony, Emily began slowly rebuilding a relationship with Carol, cautious, careful, nowhere near what it had been before, but real in its own smaller way. Carol started seeing a grief counselor, something Emily told me about hesitantly, unsure how I'd take the news. "I think it's good," I told her honestly. "I hope it helps her. I hope, eventually, she finds a way to be part of this family without needing to control how much room anyone else takes up in it." Frank's relationship with Tyler continued healing too, slower than Ryan's and mine, but steadily, a phone call every couple of weeks, tentative plans for Thanksgiving that neither of them wanted to jinx by talking about too eagerly. I finally gave Ryan the rest of Michael's letters, not just the ones addressed to specific milestones, but a few extra ones Michael had written near the end. General letters just about fatherhood, about love, about the particular ache of knowing you might not get to see your child grow up the way you'd hoped. Ryan read them alone, in his own time, and told me afterward that he finally understood something he hadn't before, that his father's love for him hadn't ended the day of the accident, hadn't been erased by Frank's arrival, hadn't required me to somehow choose between honoring Michael and building a new life. It had simply kept existing quietly, patiently, waiting in a shoebox for the day Ryan was finally ready to receive it. I wasted a lot of years being angry about the wrong things, Ryan told me one evening. Angry at Frank for existing, angry at you for moving forward, when really, I think I was just angry that Dad was gone, and none of you were actually the reason for that. Grief looks for somewhere to land, I told him. It doesn't always land in the right place the first time. What matters is whether you're willing to keep looking until it finds it. Around the 2-month mark after everything had settled, I sat down with Linda one evening and finally let myself feel the full weight of everything that had happened. Not just the anger, not just the relief, but the strange grief underneath both of them, for the version of that wedding day I would never get back. I keep thinking about the photos I'll never have, I admitted. Me walking in, seeing him in that suit for the first time in person, dancing with him the way mothers do. That's just gone. No amount of repairing what came after gives me that specific day back. No, Linda agreed gently. It doesn't. And I think it's important you let yourself grieve that honestly, instead of just being grateful for how things turned out afterward. Both things can be true at once. You can be glad for where you've landed and still mourn the road you had to take to get here. That permission, oddly, helped more than almost anything else in those early weeks of repair. I stopped trying to talk myself into being simply grateful and let myself actually feel the loss of that specific, unrepeatable mourning, even while building something new and sturdy in its place. Ryan, when I told him this, surprised me by crying, really crying for the first time since the whole ordeal began. I took that from you, he said. Even if it wasn't entirely my fault, even if I was lied to, I still took that mourning from you, and there's no version of any of this where I get to give it back. You didn't take it, I told him gently. It was taken from both of us, by someone else's fear, and by years of silence neither of us handled well enough on our own. What you're doing now, showing up, asking the hard questions, giving me your father's letters back a place in your life, that's not a replacement for what we lost. But it's not nothing either. It's actually quite a lot, Ryan. It's everything you have left to give, and you're giving it. By the time the holidays came around, our family looked different than it had a year earlier. Not fully healed in every direction, but undeniably fuller. Tyler came for Thanksgiving, quiet and a little awkward at first, softening slowly over the course of the day as Frank made a visible effort not to push too hard, just to simply be present. Emily came too, without Carol, though she called her mother that evening from my kitchen, a short, careful conversation that ended, at least, without anyone in tears. Ryan pulled me aside at one point during the day, in the quiet of my kitchen while everyone else gathered in the living room. I want you to know something, he said. I've started writing my own letters. For Emily's and my future kids, someday. I got the idea from Dad's, obviously. I don't want anything I'm carrying now, any of this, to sit silent in a box for 17 years before anyone gets to actually read it. I felt something in my chest swell at that, something that had nothing to do with grief at all. That's the best thing that could have come out of any of this, I told him honestly. Almost the best thing, he said, smiling slightly. The best thing is just having you back. Fully back. Not the careful, once-a-month version we'd settled into for years before any of this happened. I hugged him then in my kitchen, surrounded by the sound of Frank and Tyler laughing about something in the next room, Emily's voice mixing easily with Linda's, the particular warm chaos of a family that had nearly lost each other and had chosen, deliberately and repeatedly, to find their way back instead. It wasn't the family I'd pictured on that terrible Saturday morning, staring at a stranger's photograph. It was something better, in its own hard-won way, a family that finally knew, firsthand, exactly what it cost to lose each other and exactly what it took to choose one another again. Almost a year has passed now since that Saturday morning I found out about my son's wedding from a photographer I'd never met, on a platform I barely understood. Hours after the ceremony had already ended without me. If you had told me then how far things would come, Carol in counseling, slowly rebuilding a smaller but honest relationship with Emily, Frank and Tyler sharing an actual Thanksgiving table again after 6 years of silence, Ryan reading his father's letters out loud to me, one by one, in the same kitchen where I once raised him alone, I don't think I would have believed you. That morning, staring at that photo, all I could feel was the particular, bottomless loneliness of realizing the people who are supposed to tell you things first had decided, somewhere along the way, that you no longer needed to know. What I've learned since then is that silence, even well-intentioned silence, always leaves room for something else to grow in the space it creates. My own silence about Michael's letters left room for Ryan's doubt about how much I valued his father's memory. Carol's silence about her fear left room for a lie so elaborate it nearly cost my son his relationship with me entirely. If there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to take from my story, it's this: the hard, uncomfortable conversation you keep putting off with your child, your parent, your spouse, whoever it is, rarely stays neutral the longer you avoid it. It doesn't just sit there waiting patiently for a better moment. It gets filled in by fear, by assumption, sometimes by someone else's story entirely, and by the time you finally have the conversation, you may be repairing far more damage than you ever needed to create in the first place. I think about that Instagram photo sometimes, still. The way it looked scrolling past on an ordinary Saturday morning, string lights and a barn door, and my son's face, lit up with a joy I hadn't been there to witness firsthand. For a long time, that image felt like the worst thing that had ever happened to me, worse in its own quiet way than even the day I lost Michael, because at least grief has the decency to announce itself honestly. Being erased from your own son's wedding day doesn't announce anything. It just leaves you standing in your kitchen, holding a phone, trying to understand a silence you never agreed to. But I've come to think of that photograph differently now. Not as the wound itself, but as the moment the wound finally became visible enough for all of us to actually treat it. Carol's fear, my own long silence about Michael, Ryan's years of unspoken doubt, Frank's estrangement from Tyler that had been sitting quietly in the background of our whole family the entire time. Sometimes the worst moment of your life isn't actually the injury. It's just the first time the injury becomes impossible to keep ignoring. Emily texted me a photo last week, an ultrasound, 12 weeks along, the beginning of the next chapter for all of us. Ryan called an hour later, his voice thick with an emotion I recognized instantly, because I'd felt something almost identical the day I found out I was carrying him. I already started the letter, he told me, for whenever they're old enough to read it. I wanted you to be the first person I told, this time, not the last. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up, turning it over like something precious, because it was. If you've stayed with me through all of this, I want to say something directly to you, the way I wish someone had said it to me, long before that terrible Saturday morning ever happened. If there's a hard conversation you've been avoiding with someone you love, a truth you're scared will hurt them, a question you're scared to ask because you might not like the answer, please don't wait as long as I did. Don't wait until a stranger's photograph, or someone else's silence, or someone else's fear, fills that space for you instead. The people who love us deserve to hear the real, uncomfortable truth from us directly, even when it's harder than staying quiet. My son didn't call me on his wedding day. I found out from a stranger's post, hours after it was already over, and for a while, I believed that was simply the ending of something I'd spent almost 30 years building. It wasn't. It was, painfully and unexpectedly, the beginning of something more honest than what came before it, a family finally willing to say the hard things out loud, instead of letting fear and silence say them for us. I still have Michael's letters, the last few unopened, waiting for whatever milestones still lie ahead. I have a grandchild coming who will grow up knowing exactly how much they were wanted, in writing from the very beginning. And I have my son back, fully, not the cautious, once-a-month version I'd quietly settled for in the years before any of this began. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own silences, your own overdue conversations, tell me about it in the comments below. I'd genuinely love to hear it. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to close the distance with someone they love, share this with them today. It's never too late until it actually is. Don't wait to find out which one it becomes.